We live in interesting times for the headlines. Boeing says it will temporarily suspend production of its globally grounded 737 MAX jets next month as safety regulators delay the aircraft's return to the skies after 2 crashes. Opponents of a new Indian citizenship law seen as a key part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist master plan hit the streets again with alleged police brutality against protesters, fueling the anger. U.S. lawmakers careen toward the brink of one of the most divisive and momentous political steps in years, the impeachment of President Donald Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. And the final film in the epic Star Wars trilogy of trilogies brings Hollywood to a standstill as a galaxy of VIPs from the space saga that began 4 decades ago descend on a glittering world premiere. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us, and now to the news. Rescuers in the southern Philippines continue to search for survivors feared trapped beneath a building toppled by a powerful earthquake that claimed at least 4 lives. Rescuers in the southern Philippines used heavy equipment and their bare hands in hopes of finding several people feared trapped beneath a building toppled by a powerful earthquake that claimed at least 3 lives. Sunday's tremor cracked schools, toppled homes, and injured dozens, but largely spared big cities on the island of Mindanao, which is still recovering from a string of deadly quakes in October. Searchers have pulled survivors from the collapsed market building in the town of Padada, but we're still looking for a person who had texted authorities saying 6 people were trapped under the rubble.
Hindi natin ma-certain it would be an animal or human body, basta yun po ang na-detect ng ating equipment dito. So, no signs of life, no heartbeat, kaya ito na ang pinaka-ultimate and very remedy or means for us in order to penetrate whether it would be in the first floor or on the second floor. We are going to utilize the driller so that we can have the hole or passage. We can visibly see this might be body na nakita po ng ating machine.
A young child was killed when a family home collapsed near the epicenter, and searchers pulled the bodies of 2 victims from the collapsed market building. However, applause erupted after Leslie Jane Gatos, 31, was pulled from the rubble shortly after the tremor. Gatos used her phone to call for help and then began making noise to attract the attention of rescuers who reached her after clearing a path in the debris.
Nilinog man, nalabay ko, na luhod. Tapos paglingi na ko, sir, kisami na po.
Kusog yung munda?
Sugod kayo, sir, ang impact, sir. Murag ko ng, basta, murag yun siya. Ambot kamatayon siguro, sir. Pagkahuman.
Filmon Escobal said a multi-agency coordinating center in the town of Magsaysay has been expanded, while another center was also established in Padada. Thousands have been displaced due to damaged houses, prompting residents to stay in cramped evacuation sites. Sunday's tremor was the strongest in Mindanao since the series of earthquakes in the region last October. The Northeast, and up to 100 reported injured in New Delhi. Take a look.
I just want to make it clear, nobody is scared. Like people in Hong Kong are protesting, Chile are protesting, and they are not scared. We are not scared too. I think all of us are standing here for the culture of protest. We want to dissent against the state. I mean, they just can't get acts and bills against, on the basis of religion.
Hundreds of Hong Kong social workers gathered to fold origami yellow helmets to mark the first day of a planned 3-day strike. Yellow helmets have become a symbol of the city's pro-democracy protest movement. Meanwhile, the former Portuguese colony of Macau will this week celebrate 20 years since its return to China, with Beijing's leaders praising a pliant city that has grown rich and with deference to authoritarian rule. Take a look.
The economy in Macau, first of all, is very changed, and the people coming, the tourists, especially our business, the tourists in Macau is more and more year by year. So before it's a very maybe like a quiet little town, but in these 20 years we have a very big change. The 20th anniversary of Macau, the whole city, the whole community is like have a atmosphere that is a celebration in Macau. So to celebrate that, we hand it to China.
The jubilation will be in contrast to the mood in neighboring Hong Kong, the only other region run under the one country, two systems model, which has endured 6 months of often violent pro-democracy protests. Chinese President Xi Jinping will attend Friday's anniversary celebrations in Macau, where the population of 700,000 has expressed little of the Hong Kong-style dissent. Macau's skyline and economy have changed beyond recognition since 4 centuries of Portuguese rule ended in 1999. Macau's GDP has soared from $6.4 billion in 1999 to more than $55 billion. Per capita GDP is the 3rd highest in the world, behind Luxembourg and Switzerland, according to the International Monetary Fund. The one country, two systems models for Macau and Hong Kong allows the cities greater freedoms and liberties than those on the mainland. The people of Hong Kong, a former British colony that reverted to Chinese rule in 1997, have consistently pushed to protect or maximize those freedoms. Hong Kong has a bustling free press, a largely independent judiciary, and an influential group of pro-democracy lawmakers. Just a 1-hour ferry ride away in Macau, there has been no such opposition to Chinese rule. Its politicians have long since passed pro-Beijing security laws, whereas in Hong Kong, failed attempts to do so have triggered the unrest. In other news, a Pakistan court on Tuesday sentenced former military ruler Pervez in absentia to death for treason, according to state media, an unprecedented move in a country where the armed forces are often considered immune from prosecution. The case centers around Musharraf's decision to suspend the constitution and impose emergency rule in 2007, according to his lawmaker Akhtar Shah. The controversial move ultimately sparked protests against Musharraf, leading to his resignation in the face of impeachment proceedings. Musharraf has been in self-imposed exile ever since a travel ban was lifted in 2016 that allowed him to seek medical treatment abroad. The 76-year-old has since spent most of his time between Dubai and London. Musharraf wanted to record his statement and was ready to visit Pakistan, but he wanted foolproof security, which was not provided, according to his lawyer, Shah. He said he is still in Dubai and he's still sick. Musharraf, who was born in India's capital, New Delhi, but moved with his family to Pakistan at partition, took power after ousting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in a bloodless coup in 1999. The general became a key U.S. ally in the war on terror and escaped at least 3 al-Qaeda assassination attempts during his 9 years in office. His rule faced no serious challenges until he tried to sack the Chief Justice in March 2007, sparking nationwide protests and months of turmoil that led to the imposition of a state of emergency after the December 2007 assassination of former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. The national mood soured further and he was left isolated by the crushing losses suffered by his allies in February of 2008 elections. Following the court's decision on Tuesday, Bhutto's son, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, tweeted, "Democracy is the best revenge." Musharraf finally resigned in August of 2008 in the face of impeachment proceedings by the new governing coalition and went into exile. He returned in 2013 in an attempt to contest elections, but was barred from taking part in the polls and from leaving the country while facing a barrage of legal cases. In 2017, a Pakistani court pronounced Musharraf a fugitive in the murder trial of Bhutto, the first woman prime minister of a Muslim country. The anti-terrorism court has branded Musharraf an absconder and ordered the confiscation of his property. Musharraf is alleged to have been part of a broad conspiracy to have his political rival killed before elections. He has denied the allegation. Meanwhile, here are the reactions outside the Islamabad Special Court, which on Tuesday sentenced former military ruler Pervez Musharraf in absentia to death for treason. Take a look.
I say this complaint is false. This complaint is wrong. It was just to victimize him. I'm not admitting the complaint. There's no question of I cannot say about that. Let the lawyers, let the team to think over it. Today, whatever has happened with General Pervez Musharraf about his health, me, my law team, I'm speaking from Justice for All Forum, President of Justice for All Forum. We will not spare these people legally. Legally, we will take action against them, and we are capable of taking action against them.
High treason, which carries the death penalty, and for the first time in the history of Pakistan, a former military ruler has been sentenced to death. This is the maximum punishment that a military ruler can get under the special law that is called as High Treason Act of 1976. And today it's historical. It is not just a verdict against General Pervez Musharraf, but it is also a verdict against all the dictators of the past and dictators of the future. And that's why this verdict is very important, and that's why it is going to go down in a very difficult way for many of the adventurous who are still active in Pakistan's establishment and the powerful military.
U.S. lawmakers careen toward the brink of one of the most divisive and momentous political steps in years, the impeachment of President Donald Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Take a look. Polling shows Americans are almost evenly divided. A series of nationally televised hearings in recent weeks have failed to move public opinion, and signs of impeachment fatigue have emerged. The House Judiciary Committee released its full impeachment report, 658 pages. It laid out its decision to charge President Trump with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. It alleged severe episodes of criminal conduct by the president, including bribery, rebutting the Republican argument that Democrats have identified no specific criminal wrongdoing by President Trump. President Trump is expected to become only the third U.S. president to be impeached after Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998. Richard Nixon resigned in 1974, just before a House impeachment vote. Neither Johnson nor Clinton was convicted in the Senate. President Trump is also unlikely to be removed from his office in his Senate trial, where Republicans hold a 53-47 majority. Now, top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer said he was aiming for a trial to start January 6 that would mete out swift but fair justice. The Democratic Minority Leader Chuck Schumer laying out in a letter to the Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell his request that at least 4 witnesses testify, including acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
Witnesses we propose have direct knowledge of why the aid to Ukraine was delayed. We don't know what kind of evidence they will present. They might present exculpatory evidence that helps President Trump. It may be incriminating against the president, but they should be heard. We also propose that subpoenas for documents that are directly related to the charges brought by the House come forward. There's always a lot of attention on the question of witnesses, but these documents are also of great importance when it comes to making sure senators have what they need to make a fully informed decision. I haven't seen a single good argument about why these witnesses shouldn't testify or these documents be produced, unless the president has something to hide and his supporters want that information hidden. Trial structure I outlined in my letter to Leader McConnell will ensure that all the relevant facts come out without dilatory action. You know, there is a grand American tradition of a speedy and fair trial. That's just what we've proposed here. And I expect Republicans would be sympathetic to our proposal for that reason. If Leader McConnell doesn't hold a full and fair trial, the American people will rightly ask, what are you, Leader McConnell, and what is President Trump?
Impeachment will be over probably by mid-January. Personally, I think President Trump will come out of this stronger. And the good news is that everybody in politics in America needs to prove to the American public we're not all completely crazy.
In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Boris Johnson plans to pass a law guaranteeing Britain's Brexit transition period cannot run beyond the end of 2020, a source in his office said on Tuesday. Prime Minister Johnson won a big majority in last week's election on a promise to take Britain out of the European Union by the end of January, followed by a transition period when London and Brussels negotiate a trade agreement. European leaders have said the December 2020 deadline would be too tight to complete a comprehensive deal, and the main opposition Labour Party says Johnson's proposal could lead to a no-deal outcome. The House of Commons returns on Tuesday to elect a speaker and begin swearing in MPs. The state opening of Parliament will take place on Tuesday when Queen Elizabeth II will read out the government's legislative program. The withdrawal agreement bill is due to be brought before MPs on Friday. North Koreans bowed their heads and laid bouquets of flowers at Mansu Hill in Pyongyang to mark the 8th anniversary of Kim Jong Il's death. Take a look. In other news, the UN envoy to Lebanon Monday called for an investigation into alleged excessive force used against demonstrators after largely peaceful protests descended into violence at the weekend. UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Jan Kubis, called for the identification of instigators of violence. The clashes on Saturday erupted at the entrance to the street leading to Parliament as security forces beat protesters who tried to breach metal police barricades. An AFP photographer saw men in plain clothes bludgeoning protesters while anti-riot police fired rubber bullets at protesters throwing stones. The Lebanese Red Cross said both protesters and security forces were injured, with some affected by tear gas and others struck by hurled stones. Interior Minister Raya El Hassan has ordered a rapid and transparent inquiry into the violence and acknowledged that the security forces had made some mistakes. Unprecedented protests have rocked the country since October 17, demanding a complete overhaul of a political class they accuse of being incompetent and corrupt. Prime Minister Saad Hariri caved in to street pressure and resigned on October 29, but bitterly divided political parties have failed to agree on a new premier to replace him. Parliamentary consultations to name the new head of government have been postponed twice, the latest time on Monday. "49 journalists were killed across the world in 2019, according to Reporters Without Borders, the lowest death toll in 16 years. The historically low number mostly died covering conflicts in Yemen, Syria, and Afghanistan, according to the Paris-based watchdog, which warned that journalism remains a dangerous profession. Some 80 journalists a year have lost their lives on average over the last 2 decades, according to the organization, which is known by its French initials RSF. But its head, Christophe Deloire, warned that the number of journalists murdered in countries supposedly at peace was still alarmingly high, with 10 dying in Mexico alone. Latin America, with a total of 14 reporters killed across the continent, has become as deadly as the Middle East, he added. While he said that the fall in the number of fatalities in conflict zones was something to celebrate, more and more journalists are being assassinated for their work in democratic countries, which is a real challenge to democracy. While fewer journalists are dying, more are ending up behind bars, according to the RSF. Some 389 were locked up in 2019, up 12% on last year. Nearly half were imprisoned in 3 countries, China, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, which was blamed for the gruesome murder of columnist Jamal Khashoggi at its embassy in Istanbul last year. Meanwhile, 57 journalists are being held hostage across the globe, mostly in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Ukraine. Eagle News will be right back.
Kaya naman, mahalagang alamin ang mga sintomas para sa agarang aksyon, gaya ng lagnat, pananakit sa likod ng mata, pananakit ng ulo, rashes, pagsusuka, at pananakit at pamamaga ng mga kasukasuan. Kapag may lagnat ng lagpas ng 2 araw, magpakonsulta agad.
The top U.S. air transport regulator doused Boeing's hopes that its 737 MAX will return to the skies this year, while lawmakers probed why the agency failed to ground the plane after the first of 2 tragic crashes. In an interview just ahead of a congressional hearing, Federal Aviation Administration Chief Steve Dickinson told CNBC the aircraft will not be cleared to fly before 2020. The MAX has been grounded since March following the second of 2 crashes that killed a total of 346 people. Boeing has been aiming to win regulatory approval this month, with flights projected to resume in January. Many of the questions at the hearing by the House Transportation Committee focused on why the FAA didn't move more aggressively after the first crash in October 2018.
Boeing, including a civil penalty for knowingly delivering aircraft with defective, non-functioning parts that pilots believed were functioning.
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. And I have not made a decision on this and a number of other matters, as I mentioned earlier. I've expressed my disappointment to the Boeing leadership about that they need now and previously to be transparent in the sharing of information with my team here at the agency. And so I reserve the right to take further action, and we very well may do that. I'm not going to say today exactly what that may consist of, but the facts that you just presented will certainly go into that decision.
Did the FAA at some point in this process make a mistake?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And
my only, again, I just don't want to leave it at that.
no, I
That's
get
my
that.
point,
And listen,
is
there's
that
enough, there's enough pictures over here and enough blame to go around. I get that. But what I'm saying is, it's very frustrating when it's obvious that mistakes were made, that you just don't say mistakes were made. And I understand lawyers always say they, don't admit anything because of this, but I'm just telling you, in the real world, we have to look at it that a mistake was made. And obviously not one, but multiple mistakes, and we've got to get to the bottom of it. So here.
すぐ麓にある化粧室なんですが、そこだけ窓がついています。
Cash-strapped carrier Hong Kong Airlines has had 7 idle planes impounded at the city's airport after it failed to make payments, according to authorities on Tuesday, with the firm hit by a plunge in tourist numbers caused by long-running protests. The airport authority announced the seized planes under an ordinance that addresses overdue charges. Hong Kong Airlines, which has a fleet of 39 planes, said the impounded aircraft were not currently operating passenger routes. The seizures will deepen concerns over the health of Hong Kong Airlines. The firm is owned by struggling Chinese conglomerate HNA Group, which has been looking to lower its debt burden. The airline has been hammered by a sharp drop-off in tourists to Hong Kong as the city convulses from 6 months of violent pro-democracy protests. Companies and brands have doubled down with support for refugees and those who host them in major commitments announced today at the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva. At a press conference at the GRF, Inca Group, IKEA Group, and IKEA Foundation, the Vodafone Foundation, and the Lego Foundation all announced significant financial pledges, a reflection of the private sector's pivotal role in helping people who have been driven from their homes as well as the communities they now live in. Let's listen in.
What we're announcing today is the expansion of this partnership that we've had with UNHCR for the last 5 years to add an additional 250 currently under-resourced and under-serviced classroom and move them into becoming innovative digital learning hubs across 6 countries. So we're moving from a situation of 36 schools today in Kenya, Tanzania, as well as in the Democratic Republic of Congo, to in the future close to 300 schools, covering some 500,000 pupils by 2025.
So this year the Lego Foundation is awarding $100 million grant to a consortium that's been led by the International Rescue Committee to work alongside host country governments in order to improve education outcomes for an estimated 800,000 pre-primary and primary school children living in refugee settings in East Africa.
We want this narrative to be a positive narrative. These are friends, colleagues, and tomorrow it can be myself, it can be you, it can be our children or grandchildren. I think we owe the refugees today to make sure that the narrative throughout the whole world becomes a positive narrative. It is good business to do good, and we at IKEA have the fortune to think in generations, so we are super willing to invest in making sure that this narrative will change, even if it takes time, and we are extremely proud of being here today and sharing this with all of you.
While we were hiring, I started hiring these newly settled refugees into our factories, and I found out what magic was happening. And the minute they start working, that's the minute they stop being a refugee. We are in a place where businesses and brands are forthcoming and saying we stand for refugees, we stand for humanity, we stand for making things better for all humankind.
The first ever Global Refugee Forum opened on Monday in Geneva and comes as the world emerges from what the UN High Commissioner for Refugees has described as a decade of displacement. Overall, more than 70 million people worldwide have been displaced by war, conflict, and persecution. More than 25 million are refugees, meaning they have fled across international borders and cannot return home. Hundreds of demonstrators answered a call from several of France's trade unions and gathered in the Brittany town of Rennes to rally against French pension reform on the 13th day of a nationwide strike. Take a look. Tens of thousands of protesters hit the streets across France over a pension overhaul that has sparked a crippling transport strike. Though government officials insist they will not give in to union demands, they dropped the plan. Pressure on President Emmanuel Macron is growing just days ahead of the holiday break after the top official overseeing the pension negotiations was forced to resign on Monday over a salary scandal. Unions have been striking since December 5 in their biggest show of strength in years against plans for a single pension system which would do away with 42 separate schemes that offer early retirement and other benefits mainly to public sector workers. Critics say the change, which calls for a pivot age of 64 to benefit from a full pension, would force millions of people to work beyond the official retirement age of 62, one of the lowest in Europe. At a rush hour here at Gare Saint-Lazare, commuters surged towards the few trains still running because most metro lines in the capital were again closed or operating just a handful of trains across France. Just 1 in 3 high-speed TGV trains and 1 in 4 regional trains were still running. Take a look. Pressure on President Macron is growing days ahead of the holiday break. A top official overseeing the pension negotiations was already forced to resign over a salary scandal. Unions have been striking since December 5 in their biggest show of strength in years against plans for a single pension system which would do away with 42 separate schemes that offer early retirement and other benefits, mainly to the public sector workers. All right, to other news now. The U.S. Air Force tested a ground-launched ballistic missile from a California base over the Pacific, the second such test of the country's nuclear missile force in less than 3 months. The Air Force launched the conventionally configured missile from Vandenberg Air Force Base, northwest of Los Angeles, at about 8:30 a.m. local time, according to a base spokesperson. On October 2, the Air Force launched an unarmed Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile from Vandenberg, delivering a test re-entry vehicle to the Kwajalein Atoll, 4,200 miles away in the Western Pacific. No specific reason was given for this test, generally seen as demonstrating the operational capability of the U.S. nuclear missile system. But it came as nuclear-armed North Korea has hinted it could undertake its own ballistic missile test within weeks as a, quote, Christmas gift if the U.S. does not come up with concessions in bilateral relations by the end of the year. On Wednesday, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Kelly Craft, warned Pyongyang of consequences if it follows through with a major weapons test in the new year. All right, back to business. Thousands of Parisians have turned to bicycles and electric scooters to avoid the commuting chaos during a pension strike. Take a look.
Le vélo, c'est vraiment le moyen le plus efficace et simple d'aller au bureau. C'est quand même nettement plus fiable aussi que le RER parce que je maîtrise mon temps de trajet vraiment à quelques minutes près.
C'est souvent qu'il y a des grèves, tout le monde sort son vélo et on sent que les gens ne sont pas encore habitués à faire du vélo quand on est très nombreux, les pistes cyclables sont très vite saturées.
But the city's firefighter brigades, the first responders in case of emergency, have noted a nearly 40% surge in accidents since the public transport strike began on December 5. Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Plus, the brigade spokesman, said they interviewed 600 times between December 5 and December 14, up from 450 in the same period last year, and it is a big jump. The novice two-wheelers are colliding with pedestrians but also being struck by cars, according to Mr. Plus. Though most are suffering only minor injuries that do not require hospital visits. But the gridlock that has also brought thousands more drivers onto the roads means that firefighters are taking longer to respond to accidents. Tuesday marked the 13th day of the strike, which has kept half or more of the city's metro lines completely shut and severely crimped service on suburban rail lines. Since last year, Paris has been flooded with at least 15,000 electric scooters available for rent, drawing the ire of residents and city officials, complaining they are cluttering up already crowded sidewalks and squares. Philippine Overseas Labor Office conducted a consultation with Filipino migrant workers in New Zealand. Our ABC correspondent Greg Besa reports.
Since its opening just 2 weeks ago, the Philippine Overseas Labor Office, or POLO, has been receiving many inquiries from overseas Filipino workers across New Zealand who are all eager to avail of POLO services and programs that are intended for them. On the part of POLO, upon recognition of the importance of knowing firsthand the realities on the ground, it has started to reaching out the Filipino migrant workers to address the issues and concerns affecting the workers, particularly if it is directly or indirectly related to their employment. Prior to the consultation between POLO and a group of overseas Filipino workers based in Wellington City, New Zealand immigration lawyer Joko Torel discussed first the recent immigration policy changes, including those related to work visa and residency matters. Those workers in attendance took advantage of the presence of an immigration legal expert by asking questions that were related to their legal status in New Zealand. Thereafter, Labor Attaché Angel Borja Jr. discussed the services the workers could avail of from POLO. He also emphasized that his office is ready to assist and address their needs, especially those who are experiencing employment-related problems. He added that the Philippine government, through its representative offices in various countries like POLO New Zealand, will always reach out to them so as to know their conditions, aimed at promoting their utmost well-being while working overseas.
I'm very happy to have the opportunity to meet with the Filipinos who are located around here in Wellington, and I've gathered from their views and comments that they really need the presence of a POLO, and it's fortunate that our government has finally established the newest POLO here in New Zealand that will cater to the needs of these Filipino workers who are working here in New Zealand. And they are equally happy to have an office that they could go to anytime to look for help and be able to find the kind of assistance that they need from their government. That's kind of related to the vision of our very own president of bringing the government closer to the people by extending the reach of our government through the establishment of offices where our nationals are, wherever they are, so that they can be given the kind of services that they deserve from our government.
For the workers themselves, they used this opportunity to get as much information as they could from the labor attaché, particularly on how to secure the overseas employment certificates in relation to the verification of their work contracts, and on what to do if they would be having disputes with their sending agencies way back in the Philippines. Much as they were satisfied with the consultation, the workers expressed once again their gratitude to the Philippine government for the establishment of Polo in New Zealand.
Maraming salamat sa lahat ng impormasyon aming nahanap ngayong gabi. Madami po kami mga natutunang kaalaman tungkol sa pagiging WTO residency dito sa New Zealand.
At sa pagkakaroon po ng polo namin dito sa New Zealand, maraming salamat po sa ating Presidente at sa lahat ng kanyang mga kinatawan dito sa bansang New Zealand.
Lubos po ang pasalamat namin kay Labor Attache, Angel Borja, at mayroon na po tayong mapupuntahan, malalapitan na humingi po tayo ng tulong sa ating polo. So, okay naman po at andito kami ngayon na nakapag meeting kami, nagsalo-salo kami mga Pilipino rito. So, mayroon po magandang tutulong na po sa atin. Andito na po ang polo. At umaasa po kami mga Pilipino rito sa New Zealand.
Salamat po ng marami sa gobyerno ng Pilipinas dahil kahit kami ay nandito po sa New Zealand ay inaabot kami ng pagkalinga ng ating mahal na Pangulo. Sana po ang mga kapwa Pilipino dito sa New Zealand ay ipakita natin na ang mga Pilipino kahit saan panig ng mundo, Pilipino. Sa mahal naming Pangulo ng Pilipinas, Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte at kay Secretary Bello at kay Ambassador Gary Domingo, maraming salamat po sa Pangulo ng New Zealand.
As overseas Filipino workers continue to work in New Zealand, the number of cases involving them may increase significantly. Much as Polo wanted to address with urgency, it cannot single-handedly solve them all. Those Polo needs to work hand in hand with the Filipino community leaders, the workers themselves, and even the concerned agencies, both of the governments of the Philippines and New Zealand. From Wellington City, New Zealand, this is Greg Besa. I am and will always be one with 25.
Thank you, Greg. Eagle News will be right back.
Watch your favorite Net25 shows on OSN channel 725 same day as the Philippines.
Net25 is now available on OSN, the largest entertainment network in the Middle East and North Africa.
Watch your favorite Net25 shows live
and on demand anytime, anywhere on
any mobile device on OSN Play.
Kelowna Owls took on the Burnaby South in the Tsumura Basketball Invitational. Here's Zoltzi Horvath for the report.
In the semifinal of the Tsumura Basketball Invitational, the biggest preseason tournament of the BC boys basketball season, the second-ranked Kelowna Owls took down top-ranked Burnaby South to advance to the finals.
In what might have been a preview of a future playoff matchup, the two powerhouse teams went head-to-head in a battle for the ages. The second-ranked Kelowna Owls came away with a slight 77-76 victory over the #1 Burnaby South Rebels. The game had all the excitement, with Kelowna jumping out to a big lead in the first half and Burnaby South fighting all the way back to take a 1-point lead with under 4 seconds to play. Kelowna guard Jared Taylor was fouled and hit both of his free throws to put the Owls up by 1. The last play of the game came down to Burnaby South inbounding the ball and taking a long 3-point attempt, only to have the shot blocked by Kelowna's Braden White and the final horn sound. This victory for the Owls comes just 1 week after Burnaby South beat them in the semifinals of the Heritage Woods Kodiak Classic Tournament held in Port Moody, British Columbia.
The regular season begins this week for both of the squads, who look to win their conference and meet again in the provincial playoffs in early 2020. Schulte Horvath, Eagle News, 1 with 25.
The final film in the epic Star Wars trilogy of trilogies brought Hollywood to a standstill as a galaxy of VIPs from the space saga that began 4 decades ago descended on a glittering world premiere. Veterans Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, and Harrison Ford, Han Solo, arrived to bid farewell to the movies that launched their careers in style at a futuristic hangar filled with life-size X-Wing starfighters in Los Angeles. They were joined by a who's who of Hollywood. Take a look.
It's kind of weird because who knew back in 1976 when we were filming that I would be here? Back then it was a 12-week job that we all thought was a bit rubbish. We were wrong.
And the best thing about it, I love Oscar, I love Daisy. I started this whole transition with Daisy. When I met Oscar, he was just auditioning. I didn't really agree with the fact that he was auditioning anyway, but he was. And since then, we've just had such a solid friendship, so I feel good about it.
Very exciting. You know, people have said, are you sad that this is closure tonight? Well, no, not really. I mean, there's something bittersweet about it because we are saying goodbye to a lot of things Star Wars. On the other hand, as Mandalorian points out, this is just the beginning of what could be an endless set of tales told from galaxies far, far away.
Movie since I saw the first one, I was 20 when I was a drama student in 1977. So 42 years later, as a 62-year-old, to be in the final movie was off the chart exciting.
It's exciting and bittersweet because it's the end. You know, hopefully JJ gets everything done that we're hoping for, but it's also the last time a lot of us are going to be meeting together here. So yeah, it's good and bad.
It was like we're probably going to cry the entire time. We probably won't even be able to see the screen crawl, you know, as it goes up. We're going to go, okay, Rise of Skywalker, blah, you know. But I get emotional about Star Wars. I just do.
The Rise of Skywalker officially concludes the so-called Skywalker saga of films begun by George Lucas in 1977, a fact Disney's all-conquering publicity machine has used to ramp up hype on an intergalactic scale. Now, analysts are predicting a stellar $200 to $225 million at domestic box offices this weekend, which would put the film among the biggest openings in movie history. Heading the glitzy premiere were the new film's young stars Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac. Plot details have been kept tightly under wraps, but director J.J. Abrams has said the trio's characters, Rey, Finn, and Poe, will be reunited on screen after scattering for 2017's The Last Jedi, which divided fans. While Disney has embargoed full reviews until Wednesday, social media reaction from those inside the 3 Hollywood theaters blocked out for Monday night's event was broadly positive. The film is set 1 year after its predecessor and at 141 minutes will be slightly shorter. Abrams returns after his first outing. 2015's The Force Awakens broke the all-time North American box office record, making him the only person other than Lucas trusted to helm multiple Star Wars installments. But his presence has stoked controversy. Jurassic World director Colin Trevorrow was initially lined up but was fired for failing to satisfy Lucasfilm bosses with his script. And Abrams had to cope with the death of Carrie Fisher, whose iconic Princess Leia was set for a central role in the finale. Leia will instead appear using unused recut footage from Abrams' last film. And finally in our news, exploring an Osaka autumn is a magical experience. As our EBC correspondent Lou Stefan Omelda tells us, Japan is not only known for its spring cherry blossom season, its red leaves of Osaka's autumn is a sight to see indeed. Lou?
Japan has always been popular for its cherry blossoms and its beautiful culture. But did you know that there's one more thing that you'll definitely love about Japan and draws as much visitors as in spring? It's autumn! It's almost the end of this colorful season, and yet there are still a lot of visitors trying to catch one last glimpse of the beautiful koyo, or the falling of red and yellow leaves from trees, covering the streets and also the mountains. The beauty of this natural phenomenon has always been popular in Japan, and it's just as spectacular as the scenery in spring. There are many dotted spots all over the land of the rising sun where you can enjoy looking at the stunning autumn foliage. But here in Osaka, towards the western part of Japan, you can see the withering of leaves almost everywhere. But there's a special place where it doesn't cost much to visit, doesn't take much time to go to, in order to have the best autumn experience. In just 10 minutes from Osaka Station, you will be able to feed your eyes with a view of this magnificent structure and experience Japanese culture at its finest. Osaka Castle Park is popularly known as an oasis in the bustling city of Osaka. Built in 1953, Osaka Castle, which stands at the center of the park, became a center for unification under the Toyotomi rule. After going through several tragedies and natural disasters, it was reconstructed to what it is now in 1931, plus an added repair in 1997, which gave it its glamour now. Since then, it has been a major landmark in the Kansai region of Japan. The park, about 2 square kilometers wide, is home to lots of cherry and ginkgo trees, sports facilities, a tea house, and a multi-purpose arena, and a lot more. There's no specific event like hanami or cherry blossom viewing for this season, but Japanese people still take time in bringing their families and friends to places like Osaka Castle Park to bask in such a comfortable weather and short-lived part of the year. Autumn symbolizes a lot of things for Japanese people. Just as how the blooming of cherry blossom symbolizes new beginnings, autumn marks the beginning of more challenges ahead after the long summer season. It also has its major significance because autumn serves as the dawn for bigger changes and an opportunity to prepare for a more difficult and colder season. Tourists can definitely have a more peaceful time in Osaka just by walking around the park and soaking into the mystery of autumn and how it plays an important role in the Japanese culture. So the next time you travel to Japan, autumn could be the best season to do it, and Osaka Castle could be the best place to visit. Reporting from Osaka, Japan, I am Luz Stefano Melda, and I am 1 with 25.
And that's the news for tonight. Join us online and here again tomorrow evening. From all of us here at Eagle News, I'm Alma Angeles, always 1 with 25. Good night.